Good evening.
Hiya, kids.
And happy Halloween. Tonight, we're going to be ill-advisedly spelunking into the dark troughs of the human condition in an attempt to explain something that you perhaps hadn't thought of before.
Let me interpolate into this sloshy monologue and interpret for you, because you know this is going to go south really fast. Honestly, you've probably thought about everything about to be discussed before, except you had the good sense not to say it aloud, and even if you did, you wouldn't admit to it now.
Sloshy! How dare you, sir? I'm tipsy at best. Advance warning, tonight's contents will be a little bit spooky, as is tradition at this time of year.
Spooky has been cancelled, which you would know if you came across this little news item in which a woman proposed that Halloween decorations be banned, and some people took her very seriously in this and even supported her because some Halloween decorations confused her when she was trying to go to the toilet.
We've all been there. Fear and the causes of fear are the mind killer, etc. And we're going to try and ease you into some revelations slowly but concisely. You're about to hear a sound clip. It's an adult male human speaking, and I'm going to ask you, what does this adult male human sound like?
I am extremely privileged to live in a state that allows me access to the resources I need, and that decision is just between me and my doctors.
A gay man, you say? A homosexual? A bummer boy? Wrong, by the way.
Did you just look over your shoulder in case someone walked in on you listening to this?
Yes.
Because I did.
Sorry. But, many gay men don't sound like that. Some certainly do, but they're just emulating someone else. Who are they emulating? Let's have another listen.
But many states have lawmakers that feel like they can involve themselves in this very personal process.
A woman, you say. It's an emulation of a female voice.
So I assume the theory here is like noting that people doing an impression of William Shatner aren't really doing an impression of William Shatner. They're doing an impression of people doing an impression of William Shatner.
I hit him with the only weapon I had at the time, which was William Shatner. But
Wrong again, by the way.
Oh, sorry. Still, the point about Shatner stands.
It does. It's woman face. Like blackface. Or William Shatner face. Like Michael Myers. Which is Halloween themed. Now we're off track. But the point is, there are many women who don't sound like that either. Obviously, there's a certain stereotype at play here. Some stereotypes are true to some extent, some less so. On that note, let's go ahead and treat ourselves to some video footage of that very same individual.
Yeah, because why just pee on an electric fence when you can be really ambitious and take a sloppy piss on the third rail?
Day 66, being a girl, and today I'm in nature. Trees, I love them. Water, lakes, I love them. Heels, they're my hiking heels. I love them.
If you're finding yourself confused in some direction or other, don't worry, you are not alone.
Meadows, love them. I'm scared of getting Lyme disease.
Well, do worry, if you find it pertinent.
Love ya. Ah! Oh. Did you see that? I gotta get out of here. Did you see that?
There's a dragonfly.
Oh my god. Never again. Get me out of here. Love ya.
You just looked over your shoulder again, didn't you? Because there's absolutely zero chance of any of this ending well.
It almost feels like we're watching CP, doesn't it? Not that I would know what that's like. The FBI's asshole. It's just a joke. And a foreshadowing one. Yeah. That clip we just saw was pretty clearly insulting to women. And I say that as someone who's not exactly averse to insulting women. Let's carry on and see if you can pick up any more clues.
Day 75 of being a girl, and I've been carrying around tampons and pads for the past 2 months, but I've actually never opened one up. So let's do it. Woohoo!
Did you spot it? Or rather, did you hear it?
It's day 222 of being a girl. I'm in Washington, D.C., and I'm going to the White House to speak to the President of the United States.
Girl, prepare to be sniffed.
There's another clue right there. Why would Joe Biden want to meet this person? What is Joe Biden like? The pennies surely dropped by now. The adult male human you've just been listening to is not trying to be a woman, he's trying to be a girl. And in Middle English vernacular, until relatively recently, girl was a general term for child, of any sex. Boy means servant, girl means child. This is why so many MTF transsexuals are not content with just being a woman. They need to be a child.
Basically, that's like a woman, but with even less accountability. In much the same way that the phrase women and children first has the most needless use of a conjunction in the English language.
Speaking in uptalk with a compounding theory of speech impediment? That's how children talk. Frolicking around, acting like you love everything despite how empirically obvious it is that you're afraid of everything, is how children act. You might think of it as gayness or being camp because of the men emulating women. You might think of it as female because of the women emulating children. Or simply the women who have never developed beyond the state of childishness. Jokes aside, I'm not sure it is evolutionarily normal for women to be so much more childish than men. I think it's an affectation. A localized, modern affectation.
Just to expand on the sort of anthropological, sociological point being made here, steeped in cancel culture as we are, where there are the most brutal and disproportionate punishments for slights real and imagined, then radically diminished responsibility becomes a viable survival strategy.
Particularly when no other survival strategy is even applicably necessary. In our pampered, decadent culture of ours, we have machines and the great out-of-control machine we call the government. As such, most of our important tasks are automated for us, especially domestic tasks once in the purview of women. And so women, starting with the most privileged women, abandoned their adult responsibilities and reverted to childish trappings and started talking like children and acting like children. And later on, men, especially the men raised by single mothers, started emulating the childish women who raised them. And the ever-growing reach of the nanny state only makes it worse. If the government started an ass-wiping program, it would be less than a year before people started saying, if it wasn't for the government, who would be there to wipe my ass? This is the hallmark of a dying empire, folks.
If anything can be thought of as a hallmark of an empire dying by regressing into childishness, it is not only people aspiring to diminish responsibility, but at the same time being positively brutal to others. I wouldn't be a bit surprised if this person's girl child persona, when faced with actual criticism, morphs into the most psychotic, vindictive bitch from hell, exactly how children behave when they do not get immediate gratification or otherwise throwing a tantrum when they don't get their own way.
Precisely. A child's politics is a lot like a communist environmentalist's politics. In theory, it's everyone should be nice and get along with each other and share everything. But in practice, it's no, me, mine, I want. And this dissonant duality persists into adulthood in anyone who can get away with it. Starts with the women, but if the problem isn't curtailed, it infects the men as well. It manifests in the destruction of masculine identity, but it's worse than that. It's the destruction of adult identifiers. It just happens to start with women. And because we worship women, we just go along with it.
The problem for men raised by women, who then act like women adopting a childish persona of diminished responsibility, is that the consequences for a man throwing a hissy fit, say, when they're pulled over for a traffic stop, is vastly different for them than for women. When a woman has a meltdown in your face, the same social strictures that prevent you from just punching her in the face simply don't apply to men.
And so we keep tumbling into this infantility because we can. And that leaves us vulnerable to the kinds of adults who get off on the idea of taking advantage of children and of psychologically underdeveloped adults, of people who don't have the emotional wherewithal to resist manipulation.
I'm going to have to disagree with the sloshy analysis just a little here.
I resemble that marble.
A person who adopts the diminished responsibility of a child is not opening themselves up to manipulation. At least that's not the attempt. The attempt is itself a manipulation. It's not that they get taken advantage of. It's just that sometimes it doesn't work.
True. I think it's both, to be honest. Emotional manipulation is a lot like interpersonal violence. It's passed down until the point where it's finally stopped. Virtue signaling is, when people use their evil nature, their dispassion, to take advantage of other people's good nature, their compassion, and use it against them, or at least whatever sliver of honest compassion they have left. When all anyone can do is virtue signal, those with the most dispassionate nature will come out on top. Watch this clip and ask yourself, who is manipulating who?
This is my 221st day of publicly transitioning.
God love you.
I mean, it's both, isn't it? It's a delicate dance of mutual butt scratching and backstabbing. God love you both. And I mean that just as sincerely as he did.
How do you apply God love you to a person that requires hormones and surgery because God fucked up so badly when they were not only a bun in the oven, but only existed in the intent of that God? I have no idea why God would love people who should be organizing a class action lawsuit against him.
Hey God, you really fucked up.
Love you, my child.
I don't know, does Joe Biden count as an infallible deity? Like, no matter what he does, he could be working for the CCP and his son could have the corpses of children in his basement and you'd still vote for him?
There should be a clinical term for what Sam Harris has.
At this point, it's just tedious. But yeah, these infantilized tendencies in adults have this rather insidiously ironic way of circling back onto the very children whom the adults are emulating. It's not enough that adults are kept in a perpetual state of childhood. Children need to be neutered so as to guarantee that they will never even potentially reach biological adulthood.
Do you think states should have a right to ban gender-affirming healthcare?
I don't think any state or anybody should have the right to do that. As a moral question and as a legal question. I just think it's wrong.
Note the disingenuous way the question is framed. No one, absolutely no one, is in favor of banning that kind of medical intervention for someone adult and competent enough to make an informed decision for themselves. What people have an issue with is underage children being fast-tracked into irreversible mutilation because they were convinced on Tumblr that the only cure for their unease with their own body, not uncommon around the time of puberty, was chemical and surgical solutions to cognitive problems.
That our children are not receiving affordable gender reassignment surgery along with hormone blockers and access to abortions. This alone is a threat to our democracy.
Okay, so what do they mean by gender-affirming healthcare? What is this manipulated man trying to manipulate us into manipulating? They're essentially talking about eunuchs. Folks, it's turning your children into eunuchs. And it makes about as much sense as it did last time it was considered a normal thing to do. Actually, it makes even less sense this time around. The eunuchs of the modern age are not being discouraged from sexual activity. They're very much being encouraged into it, even though they cannot participate in it.
The essential tension here is in selling impressionable people a bill of goods, at once encouraging people to participate in sexuality while encouraging them, even railroading them into a procedure where whether they would actually be functional as a member of that sex, outfitted with crude analogs of sexual organs, is dubious to the point of malpractice. It's all too revealing that the very idea of making people comfortable with who they are in an unaltered body that at least works is considered the worst form of heresy.
There's almost something paradoxical about it, isn't there? Because it's inherently childish, and yet it's inherently sexual.
Remember when the sexualizing of children was a bad thing back in the days of dance moms and toddlers and tiaras? That got dropped fast as soon as prepubescent boys were encouraged to put on drag queen acts in adult strip clubs. Funny how that works.
Yeah, sex is not a childish thing. In case anyone needed to hear that. You might call it an immature thing for an adult to be preoccupied with, but it's certainly not childish. For one would certainly not expect it from a child. It is something that preteens become preoccupied with as soon as they're on the cusp of puberty. And so is gynocentrism, by the way. That's something people don't grow out of until they learn to do so. That's why these gender ideologues, for all their obsession with non-binary shit, for all their hatred of manly men, they're never going to come after girly girls. People who like pink and love running around practically naked. Again, running around half naked is not a gay thing to do or a feminine thing to do. That's right, a childish thing to do. It's something babies do. So in a way, this lady here has at least half a point. Quote, I should be able to wear whatever the fuck I want without being sexualized. Y'all keep mentioning children as if it's not the adults that sexualize bodies, not kids. Kids were complimenting me all day yesterday. I was at a movie theatre, not a fucking elementary school. End quote. Yeah, never mind the sexuality that you as an adult are clearly aware of and clearly trying to use for your advantage. Never mind sexuality at all. Just grow the fuck up and put some damn clothes on. You look like you just walked out of a veterinary clinic and fell in the dumpster. So yeah, women who act like that will forever be perfectly fabulous to this gender cult, as long as they comply with the doctrines. Ordinary, straight, cis men will never be fabulous as long as they resemble adults. That's why the drag artists that these cultists love so much are men who present themselves as caricatures of female prostitutes.
You're lucky if they are men, considering how many are just boys.
Indeed. And you'll notice those same gender ideologues have no issue with women who present themselves as construction workers or whatever, because they're still women. They're still female-bodied. They're no threat to this ideological hatred against male-bodied individuals. Unless, of course, they advocate for men's rights and interests. It's cisgendered men's rights and interests. That shit is forbidden no matter who you are. Misandry seems to go hand in hand with infantility in this movement. The destruction of adulthood is only incidental. The destruction of masculine identity is deliberate. They're not even hiding it. That's why they don't like lesbians anymore. Because lesbians sometimes have this perturbing tendency to
be competent. And we can't have that.
Yes. And competency is associated with adulthood. And being an adult is associated with being a man in a traditional sense. Self-control, self-inhibition, dressing conservatively, behaving stoically, focusing on one's own freedom and perhaps the protection of others, rather than simply one's own protection at the expense of everyone else's freedom. The latter, incidentally, quite possibly is a feminine trait.
It's in the very nature of diminished responsibility that everyone else has to be more responsible, like the responsibility of an adult in the company of children.
There's a bubble that really needs to be burst here, folks, and it's another form of what I try to call oikophobia. I speak of adults who are convinced that children are better than adults. I would have thought that was self-evidently not true, but evidence is not as self-evident as...
The assumption being that children are noble savages, which only indicates that these people are not familiar with either children or savages.
The human condition is, of course, a complicated tapestry of virtues and vices, of altruism and decadence and compassion and sadism and anything in between. And it's not all that less complicated when it comes to children. Every possible shortcoming present in the adult mind is just as present and accounted for in the mind of a child, with the obvious exception of lechery. But for everything else, more so, because children haven't been conditioned out of it yet. I know a lot of us like to think children are perfectly pure and innocent and honest and blameless blank slates who only stray from the light of goodness as and when they are corrupted by the evil machinations of adulthood. But I strongly disagree. Children are not honest. Children learn to lie as soon as they learn to speak, before they learn to speak. Babies are known to cry for attention but stop crying when they think nobody's watching them. Small children will steal cookies from the cookie jar and insist that they didn't steal the cookies even while their face is covered in cookie crumbs and the cookie jar is upended at their feet. Ironically, the people who understand this best are the parents who have witnessed it happening. I say ironically because parents will forgive their own children for everything while still judging other people's children for all the same shit. Let's just say I'm not talking about your children, dear listener. Your children are the 1 in a million exception to the rule. They really are pure and innocent and honest as the driven shit stains. No, really. Butter wouldn't melt in any orifice they feel like shoving it. But for the sake of argument, let's say we're talking about the other children. All 1 billion of them or whatever it is.
Children are little shits, but it's obvious why we have to put up with them and can't just drop them headfirst into a dumpster when they get on our nerves.
Or start chopping them up just because it's trendy.
And there is no such reason why this tolerance and forgiveness should be transferred without question to adult children.
Quite. Let us consider the people who have no children of their own but still feel as though they are qualified to teach your children how the world works. No, that does not include me. Your children should not be listening to me under any circumstances. I'm talking about teachers. The teachers you've been seeing lately, courtesy of libs of TikTok, or what have you. They feel qualified to relate to children because they still have the mind of a child, the agency of a child, and they think they're just as innocent as their own vision of what a child is. As such, they are capable of playing victim to an infant as readily as they will do it to anyone else. That is a red flag, folks. Just as sinister as the nonce flag. Well, almost.
I believe that right there gives these teachers entirely too much credit to think they're doing anything but holding other people's children hostage to coerce their compliance and, barring that, indoctrinating their children against the parents' will so that anything the parents might believe and want to instill in their children becomes irrelevant and will simply be extinguished in the next generation.
I hereby retract any credit that might have come across there. An adult with the mind of a child usually refers to someone with a particular mental challenge. It doesn't, but perhaps it should, refer to someone with, if anything, mental privilege. Someone whose mind has not developed into adult responsibility because it never had to, because it never grew out of the privileges of being looked after.
That's how hypergamy works, using perceived weakness as a tactic. In fact, as a tactic, it works so well that the progressive stack is largely a game of musical chairs where everyone is in competition for a better position of oppression before the music stops.
It's a morosely ill-effective way to train or educate anyone. It's the same conditions that make a small yappy dog remain yappy and annoying forever.
Which can be dangerous to the dog, the moment it isn't shown any deference. Because the yappier the dog, the closer it is in size and potential function to a football. The American kind. The kind you punt.
Yeah. Which brings us on to the likes of Joe Biden. A man who has managed to evade adult responsibility all the way from his first childhood right up until his second one. Characterized, as it often is, by dementia. Although in his case, I don't think it's dementia. I think it's just contempt.
I often assume that much of the White House staff's time is spent trying to unravel the mystery of what nefarious bad actor and the vast conspiracy behind them shit in Joe Biden's pants.
Yeah, some people should have never left the nursing home in the first place, let alone be put in charge of a superpower. And yeah, I know he's not really in charge. That's the problem. The real spin doctors are usually hidden behind some feeble-minded fall guy.
This administration, and the bureaucracy that weaves out of it, is so unsure of themselves and so defensive that they feel the need to punish any competence that doesn't originate from them. Which is all the competence.
That's why they have no qualms about putting a stroke victim up for election. Who needs competence when you have an identitarian shield marked re-ableism? Since when do we judge people based on ability? And then there's the diversity hires. As if it's not enough for someone to get into office on their race and sex alone, they can go on to deliberately affect a childish voice and a childish demeanour, in the hopes that no one will notice what an evil cunt they are.
Who doesn't love a yellow school bus, right? Can you raise your hand if you love a yellow school bus, right? Just, there's something about and most of us, many of us went to school on the yellow school bus, right? And it's part of our experience growing up.
Jesus fuck. The only thing more excruciating than Kamala Harris trying to string a bead of coherent sentences together is when she tries to be relatable.
I mean, honestly, how long will it be before the Democrat Party just straight up allows children to run for office? So that their associated smear merchants can dismiss every criticism against their policies as how dare you criticize a child? For heaven's sake, they're just a child. Why can't you just let them win?
Was it over when the Germans bombed Pearl Harbor? Hell no!
German? Forget it, he's rolling.
Children can't be held accountable for what we tell them to say, but they sure as shooting can be in charge of the country. If you can do it in the name of the science, you can and will do it in the name of politics. Happy Halloween, everyone. The scariest story you can tell is one that is realistic. And reality is a place that is rapidly detaching itself from reality. That's all, folks. Don't like or subscribe. It does not help the channel. But please do visit Mykeru Media, as featured. Link in the description. He deserves at least as much sunshine as I get, on account of he's been doing this since before I was. And he's really good at it, as you can see. Show him some love, and he will show you some love. And then there will be more love in the world. Love in the form of cynical existential dread. like what I do, yes. You have the likes of Mykeru to thank for the likes of me. And I would very much like for him to do well. So, spread it, folks. Spread the generosity that I know you have. Hey everybody, thanks for supporting the channel. If you want to be kept up to date, etc. Good night.